Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the Mimosa ball python. The Mimosa actually consists of the champagne and the ghost. It's a pretty awesome combination. And essentially what it does is it takes the champagne, which can kind of look like a dirty snake in some cases, and it actually really smooths it out and makes it really kind of a buttery smooth. In a lot of cases, the Mimosas actually have some purple highlights, which is pretty amazing if you look really close at Mimosas. And the champagne can be really variable from one snake to another. So a lot of times you'll see a whole bunch of different Mimosas and they'll look really different from one to the other, but it makes for a really awesome combination. And kind of the cool thing with the Mimosa, you can actually use orange ghost instead of ghost to make it even oranger. It's kind of an interesting combination, kind of an interesting spin on the Mimosa. Essentially what you make is the orange Mimosa, which is cool. And kind of the challenging thing about the champagne is when you mix it in with other combinations and other genes, a lot of times you'll end up with a completely patternless snake, or it'll reduce a lot of pattern and just change the color. And if you actually add Mimosa, the ghost, to the champagne, it makes for some really amazing combinations. So in this video, I want to jump over to the internet and I want to show you the potential of the Mimosa ball python. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on Morphmarket.com and I want to start with the champagne ball python. This is what the champagne looks like, and the champagne is kind of interesting. It's probably one of the most visually dominant morphs in all of ball pythons. You mix almost anything with champagne and you end up with a slightly different colored champagne in a lot of cases. And there are some really cool things you can do with champagne. Kind of the first thing that comes to mind is making gray matters with the champagne and the super cinnamon. It looks like a pied that is made of metal, like a metallic pied. That is probably the most amazing thing you can make with the champagne, as far as, compared to all the other genes. You really can't even duplicate that with another gene. And the champagne, if you actually take a really close look at this, it almost looks like it kind of is a little bit dirty. That is kind of the common characteristics of a lot of champagne. It looks like they kind of have, almost like some granulation along the sides and in the color. And here is what the ghost looks like. Take a look at this. This happens to be the orange ghost. And when it comes to the ghost and the orange ghost, it just as a standalone morph, it's kind of interesting. It just really fades out the snake, when it almost looks like the snake is going into shed when you add ghost to it. And the orange ghost is a little bit different than the ghost in that it has a little bit more orange. So the ghost, essentially what it does is it fades out the snake, and the orange ghost fades it out and brings in a little bit of orange color. Pretty interesting. And here's what happens if you work the ghost into the champagne. Take a look at this crazy snake. You get the Mimosa. This thing is really crazy. Probably one of the best champagne combinations that you can actually make. As a matter of fact, if I was getting into champagne, I would probably do mostly Mimosas, working on some of these purplish colored champagnes. And you can see it kind of has this almost like a purple lavender color head, and then the stripe right down the top. And sometimes, I actually pulled up a few examples of Mimosas just so you can kind of see the differences between them. Sometimes they don't have any pattern on the sides, like this one. Sometimes they have a really strong stripe. And take a look at this one. This actually has a lot more pattern. This is the same exact snake. This is the champagne and the ghost. And you can see it really keeps a lot of the purple color, and it really has a lot of pattern in this one. Here's a couple more. This one, take a look at this. This is the same thing too. It is amazing how variable the champagne can be from one to the other. This one is completely wiped out on the side with a really strong stripe. And let's see, I pulled up another one here that is a little bit different. You definitely see a lot of pattern on this one. It's kind of interesting. In all these examples, you really see a lot of this purple on the head and kind of a really faint purple outline on the stripe on the back. Pretty amazing combination. So take a look at this one. This is actually the orange ghost with the Mimosa. So this is the orange ghost version of the ghost with the champagne. You can definitely see a huge influence using the orange ghost instead of the ghost. You can definitely tell it brings out a lot more orange in this combination. As a matter of fact, this is actually called the orange Mimosa. It's kind of the common name for this. Sometimes they'll just, call it the Mimosa too. And here's another one I actually pulled up. Take a look at this one. It is almost completely patternless. patternless with no line, dotted line right down the top. It is so amazing from one to the other. And if you actually notice on this one, it has a little bit of white here and there. This one is actually 100% het pied. Usually if you have one copy of the pied gene, usually there are really subtle markers, only if you have like a normal classic wild type ball python. But if you mix it into other combos, usually you can't see you have one copy of the pied. But with the champagne, it is really interesting. If you have one copy of the pied, you'll actually get a visual looking snake that looks like a visual pied, but it only has one copy of the pied. I actually pulled up another one here. Take a look at this. This looks exactly like a pied. This is a Mimosa 100% het pied, which is a really interesting kind of an effect that the champagne has with one copy of the pied gene. As a matter of fact, if you took two of these and bred them together, well, actually, you probably wouldn't want to do that, because yeah, you really don't want to breed a champagne to a champagne because it's a lethal combination. So essentially what you want to do is you want to take the champagne, you breed it to a visual pied, which has the splotches of white in a visual pied. And if you actually hit it with the champagne and two copies of the pied, essentially what you end up with is a completely white snake with no color at all. It's kind of an interesting anomaly, breeding the het pied in with the champagne. And let me tell you, if I had a champagne, I would probably work on the Mimosas, the champagne het pieds that look just like a visual pied, and I'd probably go with the gray matters. It's pretty awesome. Those three are probably the best things you can do with the champagne. So here's something that's really interesting with the champagne in general, and it works really well with the Mimosa. You can actually add enchi into the mix, and enchi, essentially what it does is it really brings out a lot of the pattern out of the champagne. So a lot of times with the champagne, if you get like a different colored, completely patternless snake, what you can actually do is mix enchi in the mix, and that'll bring out the patterns. And a lot of times if there's other genes in the mix that are kind of hidden underneath the champagne, the enchi will bring those out and make it look really impressive. It's kind of the same way if you're using, if you're working with the ivory, which is the super yellow belly. There's really only one gene that brings out the color and the pattern, and that is the leopard if you're working with the ivory. And it kind of works the same way with the enchi and the champagne. So take a look at this. This is kind of crazy. This is an enchi Mimosa working enchi into the champagne ghost, which is really crazy. And you can see it's pulling out a whole bunch of pattern that you normally wouldn't see. It's a very unique pattern that you normally wouldn't see in a Mimosa. As a matter of fact, I pulled up this other one here. Take a look at this. This is the Orange Dream Enchi Mimosa, and take a look at this beauty. This is pretty amazing. Let me tell you, when it comes to champagne, enchi is the key to making really amazing combinations. I probably work with like enchi or something like that too in a lot of these combinations, and you can definitely tell the enchi is bringing out a lot of the pattern, and along with that pattern, it's bringing out a lot of the yellow from the Orange Dream, which is pretty amazing. And take a look at this one. I actually pulled this one up too. This one is really amazing. This is the Orange Dream Super Enchi, so it has two copies of the enchi in the Mimosa, which is the champagne ghost. So you can definitely tell, you know, with two copies, the other thing with the Super Enchi is the Super Enchi also brings out some of the oranges. So with the Super Enchi, you're bringing out a lot more of the orange yellow with the Super Enchi, and then you have Orange Dream on top of it that is really enhancing the color of the snake. Makes for a really amazing combination. I didn't even look at the price on this one. This one is $1,800. This is probably the best version of a champagne combo that I've ever seen. Pretty amazing. And it's kind of hard to hit because you have essentially you have a super and a recessive, which is the ghost. So you have two copies of the enchi, two copies of the ghost gene, and then the Orange Dream and the champagne. So essentially this is a 6-gene combination. Pretty hard to reproduce, and it'll be pretty hard to hit in a lot of combos. So take a look at this. When you actually work blackhead into the Mimosa, you get an interesting effect, which is kind of unexpected. The blackhead is a dark morph. It's probably the darkest of the dark when you're looking at, you know, the dark morphs like the cinnamon and the GHI and the black pastel and the blackhead. Let me tell you, when you mix blackhead in with other combinations, usually it darkens the background more than any other dark morph. It's really awesome. And if you just look at the blackhead by itself, it has a really dark background, and it always has a really black head, which is really awesome. This is actually one of the morphs I want to get into at some point, working into some of the dark side morphs. And if you actually work blackhead into the Mimosa, take a look at this. This is pretty unexpected that you actually have something breaking through the Mimosa with these black lines right down the center line. Pretty amazing. It actually turns the head black, which is it's pretty amazing that something can actually break through the Mimosa with these really dark colors and have that much of an effect. It's pretty awesome. And usually the blackheads are pretty expensive. This one is actually sold for $1,000. Pretty crazy on some of these prices. And kind of the interesting thing too is if you actually look at some of the genes on this one, this actually has the blackhead, the champagne, and the ghost. So it's not too hard to hit because you only have 2 copies of the ghost with 2 other genes. So it's just a 4-gene combo. Not too difficult to actually hit. So speaking of dark morphs, here is the DJI. The DJI is not as visually dominant as the blackhead, although it tends to darken the background in a lot of combinations. And the DJI tends to really scramble up the pattern in a lot of combinations, but there's really no pattern when you mix it in. Take a look at this. When you mix the DJI in with the Mimosa, take a look at this. This thing is crazy. I actually found several of them over here, and it has this really weird effect where you have kind of almost like a silvery gray side with this bright orange stripe right down the top, and I really can't explain what is going on between this combination and the DJI. And you get a little bit of dark here and there. That's almost like some paradoxing kind of breaking through. Makes for a really crazy combination. So here is the Pinstripe. This is one of my favorite standalone genes. The Pinstripe is probably the brightest gold snake that you can get just as a single gene standalone morph. And if you actually work Pinstripe into the Mimosa, take a look at this. The Pinstripe is completely dominated by the Mimosa, which is pretty amazing because the Pinstripe is usually a really visually dominant morph. You mix it with anything else, you can almost always see the Pinstripe in the mix. And in this one, it completely wipes it out. If someone handed me this snake, I wouldn't even guess that there is Pinstripe in the mix. Pretty crazy. So here is the Mojave. The Mojave is actually in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. So if you actually breed 2 Mojaves together, you get an all-white snake with blue eyes. And kind of the hard thing with anything in the blue-eyed leucistic, if you actually bred this with something else in the blue-eyed leucistic, like bamboo or butter or lesser or mocha or phantom or special or any of those, yeah, is essentially what you end up with an all-white snake with blue eyes, and it masks everything else. So I can almost guarantee that if you made a blue-eyed leucistic and added champagne in the mix, I think the blue-eyed leucistic would win out and you'd end up with an all-white snake, which is kind of one of the limitations of working with the blue-eyed leucistic genes. And here's what happens when you work Mojave in with the Mimosa. And take a look at this. This actually has a slang name. It's actually called the Mojito. And it's pretty amazing that the Mimosa even dominates the Mojave in this one. It's pretty amazing. So this actually, keep in mind that the Champagne Ghost, the Mimosa, is 3 genes, the 2 copies of the Ghost and the Champagne. So when you work another gene into it, you're looking at 4 gene combos, a little bit more difficult to work with. And if you actually take a look at this, I really like kind of, it's almost like you still kind of keeps the purple, kind of these weird spots right on the head that kind of go right down to the eyes. Kind of an interesting little head stamp on a lot of these Mimosas. And this one you see a little bit of pixelation coming right in the side, but I'd say in most cases when you add Ghost to the Champagne, you really smooth out the pattern and make it really buttery smooth as far as the visual appearance. So here is the lesser. When you work the lesser into the Mimosa, you get a really unusual effect. The lesser is also in the blue-eyed leucistic, and if you actually breed the lesser to the Mojave, you get the lesser Mojave blue-eyed leucistic, which a lot of people consider the #1 best blue-eyed leucistic. It is really super pure white, and it has perfect size eyes. Sometimes you can have kind of weird shaped eyes on some of the blue-eyed leucistic. Sometimes you can get like the micro eyes that are really small, or you can get the bug eyes that are really big. And if you actually mix these two together, they say the eyes in most cases are just about perfect, as you would see on a normal ball python. And here's what happens if you work the lesser into the Mimosa. Take a look at this. I actually came over here and I looked at, you know, probably 20 examples of working lesser into the Mimosa, and every single time you end up with an almost white snake. It has like a creamy yellow color with this really faint line right down the top, and sometimes you just kind of scratch your head, how in the world are these genes working together to form these colors and these combinations? Sometimes it is completely unexpected. So here is a firefly. Take a look at this. This is probably one of the most stunning fireflies that I've seen over here on Morphmarket. This is actually the combination of the fire and the pastel. It makes for a really bright and super intense snake. It's really crazy. This one is actually 100% het puzzle, which is a really expensive recessive mutation, but you really can't see the puzzle in this one. And here's what happens if you work the firefly into the Mimosa. Take a look at this. It completely dominates the firefly. And you know, the kind of the first thing I'm thinking is, you know what would be really cool is if you actually took the firefly Mimosa and you worked in Enchi or super Enchi. I bet you would get some really screaming combinations. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Megasaurus Games asks, if a ball python lays eggs, can you leave the mother on the eggs to hatch them out by herself? And that is a very good question. I'd say in most cases, most people remove the eggs from the female, but I've actually seen a few people where you can leave the eggs with the female and she'll actually hatch them out. And probably one of the biggest things, one of the reasons I don't leave the eggs with the female is because, you know, in the whole breeding season, she usually fasts for a few months before she finally lays eggs. And if you actually keep the mother on the eggs, she will keep those eggs and won't eat it all until they hatch. And it's actually a 2-month incubation period for those eggs. So that's another 2 months that your female won't eat. And I've actually had some eggs that I pulled from females, and within the very first week, that female will go back on food. And that's really what you want, especially if you're planning to breed that female for the following season. Because if you wait 2 months, let me tell you, usually you can't get enough food into them to breed the next year, and then you kind of have to skip a year. And the other thing I've actually seen is people with really big snakes, if you leave the eggs in there with like a reticulated python or sometime, you know, you go in there, you're kind of messing with the snake. I've actually seen really big snakes put a death grip on those eggs and actually crush them and break all the eggs, which is really tragic. And kind of the other thing is yeah, I think it'd be really hard to actually keep the right humidity and temperature, especially in a really dry climate like I have here. Normally we incubate at 90 degrees and my snake room is about 80 degrees. And I'd say I probably could do it here in my snake room, but I probably have to increase the temperature to about 90 degrees. And some people do keep their reptile rooms at 90, but let me tell you, working in 90 degrees is not really comfortable for me. And that's usually why I keep it between 80 and 82 here, just so I don't, you know, it's not like a sweatshop working down here in my reptile room. And the other thing here in my, kind of in this Colorado climate, it is really super dry, almost like a desert. It is less than, I'd say probably less than 10% humidity, and you have to really struggle with keeping things hydrated. So I'm not sure it would really work out as far as the temperature or the humidity, keeping the eggs with the snake. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.